With a broken leg, my daughter-in-law claimed I was faking. What I revealed next was inspiring. Harold sat in his worn armchair, a creaky relic from a simpler time, staring blankly at the framed family photos decorating the walls. Each image was a window into warmer days, laughter, togetherness. Now, however, they were haunting reminders of a past that felt increasingly distant. Faking it, Sarah's voice echoed in his head, an accusation laden with sharpness and disbelief. The thought made his stomach churn with humiliation. Did she truly think he would manipulate his own injury for sympathy? With every passing moment, he felt even more estranged from his own family. Their love now chiseled down to what seemed like conditional existence, dependent on his ability to maintain a semblance of normalcy. How had it come to this? 2 months in recovery from the cracked bone brought waves of doubts crashing over him. Communication had become a tightrope walk, one wrong word, one shaky step of vulnerability, and he risked falling deeper into an abyss of scrutiny and resentment. Mark had become rigid, burdened beneath the weight of his wife's ambitions, caught between her aspirations and the frailty of a father who had given him his life, and until recently, his guidance. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. At the Sunday potluck, Harold felt like a foreigner in his own home. Sarah's glances, sharp and probing, felt like daggers. Harold could hardly concentrate on the conversations buzzing around him, filled with laughter and camaraderie. The kids, who once would run to him with gleaming eyes, now passed by, barely acknowledging his presence. He was a relic of a past life, a ghost haunting a house he once filled with happiness. As he watched Sarah and Mark navigate the room, he felt pangs of anger and helplessness. Did they not see him shrinking under the weight of their disdain? Inside, he wrestled with thoughts of his late wife, Eleanor. Her passion for art had transformed simple moments into masterpieces. She had known how to rise above hardship. Maybe it was time to share this part of his life, to reveal how her resilience inspired not just him, but perhaps his family too. But as he struggled to find the right moments to speak up, Sarah's words continued to echo in his mind, drumming rhythmically against the walls of his self-worth. Would they understand? Would they still care, or simply view him as a manipulative burden? Just as he began to gather the courage to speak, Sarah confronted him, her face flushed, frustration bubbling over. Why can't you just accept your age and let Mark and me handle things? Her accusations cut like glass. It ignited an internal fire, and for once, Harold felt the heaviness in his chest push against his resolve. His leg throbbed, a physical reminder of his struggles. Here he was, on the precipice of sharing something beautiful, Eleanor's legacy, and yet trapped in a cycle of misunderstanding. But he saw a flicker in Mark's eyes, a hint of empathy, maybe understanding, standing behind a veil of tension. Would this confrontation be the catalyst he needed? As the moment hung there, he breathed deeply, battling the tempest of emotions within. Would he find the strength to rise above the doubts and guide them back to the values Eleanor had instilled? Harold sat still, teetering on the brink of action like a tightrope walker regarding the abyss below. His heart raced, demanding affirmation that it was time to reclaim his voice. Eleanor would have embraced this moment. She'd have brought artistry and elegance to the confrontation. She always had a way of turning vulnerability into strength. His thoughts spun, but he could no longer remain tethered to silence. He cleared his throat, feeling a surge of warmth as he prepared to share his truth. "Sarah," he began, his voice wavering but resolute, "what happened to me? My leg? My recovery? It's not just about physical healing. It's a journey. It's the memories of Eleanor and the lessons she taught us about navigating through pain. The room seemed to momentarily still, the bustle fading into a low hum as eyes timidly returned to him. He took advantage of their attention, leaning into the vulnerability he had so long avoided. Art, poetry, passion. She filled our lives with those things. She taught me that every scar tells a story, and recovery isn't just about the broken bone. It's about re-establishing connections that matter, about acknowledging the real emotions beneath the surface. Sarah's brows furrowed, her expression shifting from skepticism to curiosity. Mark stood still, absorbing his father's words, the tension in his body softening. With each passing second, Harold found more clarity. The bitter accusations of faking began to recede like shadows at dawn, revealing the golden potential of reconciliation. "Did you know," Harold continued, "that Eleanor once painted an entire mural in our living room when I was bedridden with an illness? She made it a masterpiece, transforming my recovery space into a sanctuary. Art was her way of reminding me that healing could also be beautiful." As the memories poured from him, Harold felt a transformative energy unfolding, one that transcended the isolation he had been feeling. "Perhaps I've forgotten how to express that. Maybe I need your help to remember how to find beauty in this chaos, to learn from each other again." The room remained silent, and Harold could sense the emotions swirling amongst them. He had shared himself, unwrapping a part that had been tightly bound in the fabric of doubt and despair. This wasn't just about him, it was about them. Yet with every ounce of courage he had to speak, a nagging doubt flickered in the corners of his mind. Was his family truly ready to embrace this openness? Then Mark stepped forward, the flicker of understanding morphing into resolve. "Dad, I didn't realize how much you've been holding back. I've been frustrated, not because of you, but because I felt helpless. Maybe it's time we all start being more honest with ourselves." The conversation began to build, tentative at first, but gaining momentum. Harold felt a warmth penetrate his heart, hopeful that together they might unlock the echoes of Eleanor's spirit once again. They had the potential to resurrect connections frayed at the edges, to confront their beliefs with courage. But as the discussion deepened, Harold felt the ground shift beneath his feet. What if sharing these memories opened old wounds? What if Sarah could not accept this new paradigm? Determination painted his thoughts in vivid colors, yet fear lingered at the edges of his mind. Could this breakthrough mark the turning point he sought, or would it invite confusion and conflict instead? As they navigated the waters of collective healing, Harold realized that the greatest revelation had just begun. A journey not just of mending, but of rediscovery. The moment hung in the air, thick with unspoken words and emotional potential. The moment of truth was approaching. Would he dare to guide his family into the uncharted waters of vulnerability and shared history, bridging the gaps that had divided them? Harold felt a shift in the atmosphere, an electric tension surrounding him and his family. As they leaned in, absorbing his words, he realized that he had finally breached the internal dam of silence that had long protected him from conflict. He had opened a door, but was he prepared for what stepped through? Doubt gnawed at him, but it was quickly eclipsed by the dawning realization that this could be the connection he had been longing for. "Dad?" Sarah finally spoke, her voice cautious yet unwavering. "You think this creative resilience you talked about can help us deal with our grief?" "Absolutely," Harold replied, a conviction blooming within him. "Sharing our pain doesn't have to bring us more sorrow. It can illuminate the paths we never thought to explore together. Just think about Eleanor's mural. She didn't paint alone. I was there, watching her work, feeling her spirit, connecting with her in ways words often fail to capture." Mark's eyes grew wider. "I remember that. I remember how it made things feel lighter, Dad. Maybe we could create something together, like a tribute to her." A swirl of emotions continued to weave through the room. The idea of transformation sparked something powerful in him, igniting a long-lost sense of purpose. Yet a lingering fear gnawed at the edges of his resolve. What if they weren't ready? What if this moment unraveled instead of healed? He met Sarah's gaze, finding a glimmer of empathy lurking in her confusion. It was as if unspoken acknowledgments passed between them. She was wrestling with her own preconceived notions, the image of him as a victim juxtaposed with the man who sought to emerge reborn. But rebuilding that connection requires all of us to dig deep, doesn't it? She pressed. Yes, he conceded. But isn't it worth it? Aren't you curious about what we could discover together? It's not just about honoring Eleanor. It's carving out our own identities in her absence. It's about transforming our scars into a canvas, just like she did. The room buzzed with their thoughts swirling together, and something shifted deep within Harold. This wasn't merely a proposal to create art. It was an invitation to open themselves fully, to confront the complexities of their grief, anger, and ultimately, love. He could feel their collective hesitation hanging thick in the air, a barrier he was determined to dismantle. Let's start small, Harold suggested, the words tumbling forth with unexpected clarity. Why not come over this weekend? We can go through the things she left behind, share our thoughts, our memories. We can start there. Mark looked hesitant but intrigued. We'd need to approach it as a group. Everyone involved, right? Exactly, Harold affirmed, enthusiasm sparking in his voice. We've spent so much time apart, drifting into our own silos of sorrow. It's a chance to rekindle our ties and maybe, just maybe, find a way to bring her legacy into our lives. To create something that reminds us of her. Amidst their deliberations, Harold understood that he had crossed a threshold. He was no longer a mere spectator in his own recovery. It was a revelation, a realization that achieving acceptance meant daring to confront the uncertainty that lingered in their hearts. But as he looked into their faces, marked by a blend of hope and trepidation, he wondered if they were ready for this journey. Could vulnerability be their shared language, or would secrets ultimately remain buried beneath layers of unexpressed grief? With every heartbeat, anticipation drew him closer to a turning point. Yet chaos stirred beneath the surface, a feeling of impending conflict that thrummed quietly within his chest. He sensed the underlying hesitance veiling their expressions, an unpolished authenticity that had yet to break free. The promise of healing lay tantalizingly close. The next step was to break down the walls, to delve into the shadows that had taken root within each of them. The uncharted waters ahead stirred with possibility, yet Harold steadied himself, wondering just how deep they would have to dig before they uncovered the gems of reflection and acceptance. As the conversation dwindled, a palpable pause filled the room, inviting everyone to examine what lay ahead. Would they rise to the occasion, embracing the vulnerability that lay ahead? Would the prospect of confronting old wounds allow them to forge a new collective identity? The groundwork had been laid, but the moment of truth now loomed larger than life, casting shadows of uncertainty that were impossible to ignore. Harold awoke the following morning, feeling the weight of possibility pressing against him. The sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the remnants of Eleanor's vibrant artwork scattered around the house, including the paint-stained brushes and sketches still pinned on the fridge. Each piece seemed to whisper a reminder of the talk they had shared the night before, a hint of hope accessible only through shared vulnerability. He brewed coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, yet his mind raced with trepidation. Would Mark and Sarah truly be ready to face the emotions they had buried? The coffee steamed in front of him, a comforting ritual he clung to as his nerves threatened to spiral. It was an odd dance between cultivating excitement and facing the shadows. As he prepared to welcome them over the weekend, Harold found himself reflecting on how grief can often be an isolating experience. Each family member carried their own form of sorrow, guarded and distinct, breaking forth only when stirred by life's most profound moments. He pondered his own path, the moments spent in silence, rehearsing sentiments that never came to fruition. Would initiating this gathering break more than mended? Days trickled by, peppered with quiet anticipation. And when Saturday arrived, the atmosphere hummed with unspoken words. Mark arrived first, his hands stuffed in his pockets, scanning the room as if searching for familiar ghosts. Sarah followed closely, revealing a facade of confidence that masked her apprehension. "Hey, guys," he started, gesturing toward the living room table cluttered with Eleanor's belongings. "This is all part of it, our journey." Sarah sighed, visibly struggling with her emotions. "Do we really have to go through all her things? It feels overwhelming." "Overwhelming is valid," Harold replied slowly, his heart racing. "But maybe that's where we start. Let's allow ourselves to feel whatever surfaces." They began sorting through an array of mementos, each item laden with stories. Harold could see how Sarah's fingers trembled as she lifted a ceramic figurine Eleanor had expertly crafted, a delicate reflection of her artistic intuition. Mark held a string of old photographs, his eyes clouding over. Distractedly shuffling through them, Harold had to remind himself to focus on the discomfort of the moment. The unraveling of their grief was progressing, yet the tension felt palpable. A sudden laugh escaped Sarah's lips, unexpected yet bright. "Remember this?" She held up a photo of the whole family, their smiles captured in a sun-soaked park, Eleanor grinning broadly. The sharing of laughter released a surge of emotion, breaking through a thick layer of tension that had lingered like fog. Harold's heart thudded in rhythm with the realization that these moments would be the linchpin of their experience. Revealing grief was a means to uncover buried treasures of love and connection, and this was only the beginning. Yet he sensed an undercurrent of resistance, the barriers still intact in the deeper recesses of their minds and hearts. "Why do you think she was happiest here?" Mark's voice trembled as he flipped through more photographs. Seeing the boy's emotional turmoil mirrored his own discomfort. "Because we were together," Harold replied, an idea sparking within him. The realization swayed him to challenge the silence that still shrouded them. Moments of joy can be bittersweet. It's okay to embrace both. But as the atmosphere lightened, he grappled with emerging questions hovering over him. Would connection truly heal? And what hidden truths were they all still avoiding? The phrase echoed in his mind. To connect is to confront. Perhaps that was where their journey would blossom, not just for honor, but for their own rediscovery. There was still so much to unpack. This was merely the introduction to their long-awaited reckoning. As they continued to sift through memories, unease flickered within Harold as he sensed a deeper, unspoken conflict rising between Mark and Sarah. Would he find the strength to guide them through? Was he ready to confront not just their pain, but the old wounds of his own? At that moment, Harold realized he wasn't just putting pieces together. He was navigating the dangerous but essential territory of emotional honesty. The thought electrified him. Perhaps in this chaotic process, they might all find not just traces of Eleanor, but fragments of themselves. And just as he turned to share his hopeful vision, he caught glimpses of an impending storm brewing. Would they weather it together, or was the past about to unspool in unpredictable ways? Harold's heart raced as he observed Mark and Sarah, the tension thick enough to slice. He could almost hear the unsaid words swirling around them. It was a dance of defensiveness versus vulnerability, and in that moment he realized he had a decision to make. The stakes were no longer just about grieving Eleanor. They had evolved into a profound opportunity for growth, for himself and his family. "Let's take a break," he suggested, pacing away from the photographs. "Let's talk about her, about us. What would she want from this moment?" He glanced back at them, hoping to kindle a spark of openness. Mark shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and Sarah leaned forward, her fingers still clenched around the ceramic figurine. "I don't know if she would want us to go through her things like this. It feels wrong," Mark finally uttered, his voice tight. "She wanted us to stay connected," Harold urged, sensing the first glimmer of emotional entry into their realm. "And to remember her, not just the things, but the way she made us feel." Mark's expression softened slightly, though uncertainty remained etched in his features. But it hurts. It feels like digging up graves. Sometimes, in digging, we unearth what we've buried, our emotions, our memories, and even our resilience, Harold replied, surprised by his own assertiveness. Each statement felt like a step deeper into the core of their struggle. He held on to the belief that this wasn't just about Eleanor. It was about facing their own unprocessed grief. For a moment, silence engulfed them, but within it lay the potential for breakthrough. Harold inhaled deeply, attempting to ground himself. He pictured Eleanor guiding him. Perhaps this was a process not only of remembrance, but of fostering renewal. Finally, Sarah broke the quiet. What if we just talked about her, like memories that make us smile? The fragility of her voice held a fragile hope, a shift in their dynamic. I like that, Mark affirmed, a hint of lightness reclaiming his demeanor. So Harold initiated a round of storytelling, feeling the centuries of burden slip from his shoulders with each shared anecdote. Their conversations flowed like a river breaking through an icy barrier. Moments shared highlighted Eleanor's quirks, the stories of her wild spontaneity, the joyous laughter that erupted from just simple family dinners, and her infectious zest for life. With each memory, Harold noted how the ice among them seemed to thaw. Laughter flowed easily, though the shadows still loomed. It felt as though they were strengthening bonds that had grown threadbare. Yet, deep within Harold's subconscious, he braced himself for the culmination of emotions yet to surface. I still can't believe how she made the worst puns at the worst moments, Mark chuckled, and for the first time since this gathering began, his laughter seemed genuine, resonant, and loud. Emboldened by their laughter, Harold ventured cautiously. Do you remember that time she painted that mural without telling us? It was a complete surprise. Sarah's face lit up, the shadows retreating momentarily. Oh God, I came home from school and just thought, did I walk into an art gallery? That woman had no limits. In this exchange, Harold perceived a burgeoning connection, fleeting yet firm. However, he couldn't shake off the sensation that beneath their revelry lay unaddressed grief waiting to erupt. The more they shared, the more a deep-seated ember of tension rekindled, waging against the emotional progress they had made. All the while, Harold pondered if he was equipped to navigate the complexities of their anguish once they surfaced. As if sensing the precarious balance, Mark's expression turned more somber. But what about the things we haven't faced? The arguments, the blame? A chill slipped through Harold's veins at the phrase. He knew this conversation was near, a confrontation that could either shatter or fortify their family ties. The weight of his past decisions loomed over him. The moment demanded more than just storytelling. It required vulnerability, a willingness to explore painful truths. Perhaps we need to look at the things that hurt, Harold said, bracing himself. It's time to really confront what we've been avoiding. The tension thickened, swirling like a tempest that threatened to breach the peace they had momentarily crafted. His heart beat with anxious anticipation, as he wondered if they were ready to face the storm that lay ahead, or if they might retreat into the safety of silence once more. Would they be able to harness their shared grief and emerge stronger, or was the truth too devastating to confront? The answer was poised just beyond their fingertips, waiting for the impending verbal storm to break. Harold felt the air shift, laden with unresolved tensions that twisted his insides. He looked at Mark and Sarah, their eyes reflecting both defiance and vulnerability. We can't keep avoiding this, he pressed gently. Eleanor wouldn't want us to pretend that everything is all right when it's not. Mark's jaw clenched, a telltale sign of impending conflict. Harold wished for a more graceful method to clear the air, but there was no way around it. They needed to confront the elephant in the room, the blame that had grown like a weed, choking their connection. Why didn't we see things the same way with her? Sarah finally broke, her voice quivering. We were so caught up in our own grief that we didn't even talk about what we needed. Her admission pierced through the stifled emotions, catalyzing the flood of suppressed words. Right, Mark muttered, frustration swirling in his tone. It was like we were reliving the same fight every time we brought her up. It was easier to be angry than to acknowledge the pain. Easier? The notion resonated with Harold. Easing aside the pain felt like a late-night escape, an act of self-preservation. Yet he faced a countering instinct, one that urged him to engage with every sharp edge of their shared suffering. Anger isn't weakness, he interjected, recognizing an opportunity to recalibrate the momentum. It's an authentic part of grieving. We loved her, and now we're feeling her absence in conflicting ways. The atmosphere shifted again, as if an unseen weight had lifted just a fraction. Mark's shoulders sagged slightly, and Sarah's clenched fists relaxed, their unmasking eliciting a shared vulnerability. Harold felt emboldened. Perhaps this was the turning tide. When I think of her, anger rises at the missed chances, the what-ifs. But buried beneath that anger is also love, a love that desperately wants to celebrate her life instead of focusing on her death. Sarah nodded, her eyes shimmering like glass. What if we wrote our feelings down? The idea seemed tentative, but grounded in the momentum they had nurtured. Like a letter to her, not just love letters or apologies. Everything. The concept hung in the air, a weighty promise of release. We can finally articulate all the things we couldn't say then, Harold added, harnessing the energy that enveloped them. He realized that this moment could become a healing ritual, potentially salvaging their frail connections. But what if we... Mark started, his voice quaking with uncertainty. What if we don't like what we find in ourselves? What if we discover things we can't take back? That question pricked at Harold's resolve, an opening to delve deeper, to examine their unwillingness to confront the ugly truths. Isn't that a risk worth taking? His challenge hung palpably in the air. To face ourselves, to tear away at the shame of holding emotions we thought we had to bury? As they sat in silence, each lost in thought, Harold realized that he was not just guiding them. He was facing his own demons, too. The specter of failure lingered, but so did the glow of possibility. They could reclaim the narrative of their family, redefine the experience of loss. What if we held an open space for both? Sarah proposed cautiously. And let the letters become our guide? Harold completed her thought. Yeah, just raw honesty, Mark added, a hint of resolve returning to his voice. They exchanged a hesitant look of agreement. The fragility of their moment bore witness to a critical pivot, a crossroads. Would they have the strength to follow through? As they began mapping out their plan, another wave of uncertainty greeted Harold. This was no longer solely about grieving Eleanor. It was about personal revelations that threatened to reshape their identities. Would the process unearth not just hurt, but unforeseen resilience and unity? In the quietude that followed, Harold pondered what hidden truths each letter would reveal. His pulse quickened at the prospect, a reminder that with vulnerability came strength, but so too came fear. Would he and his family be brave enough to confront the full spectrum of their emotions, embracing the depths of their truths? The next moment would demand more than mere acknowledgement. In the stillness, a new storm brewed, one that would either tarnish the fragile bonds they'd started to tentatively reconstruct or set them free. The outcome loomed. What awaited them as they dared to uncover their truest selves? The sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows across Harold's living room, where remnants of unresolved feelings coiled like a living entity in the air. As they sat together with paper and pens, Harold's heart pounded with the weight of anticipation and fear. His fingers hovered above the blank page, a battlefield for thoughts that surged and recoiled. How would he start to unravel the enigma of their shared grief? Let's begin with what Eleanor meant to each of us, he finally suggested, breaking the heavy silence. The words felt both empowering and daunting, as if initiating a monumental excavation of their past. Mark's brows knotted. Do we really want to dig that deep? I mean, what if it opens things we can't control? Isn't that the point? Harold countered, frustration lacing his tone. We can't repair something we don't first acknowledge. Remember what we said, raw honesty, it's essential. Obliging, Mark shifted nervously in his seat, picking at the edge of his notebook. Harold felt a shudder of empathy for him, sensing the resistance churning beneath the surface. A part of him wished for an easy path, but he recognized that nothing transparent ever was. Sarah broke the silence, her voice steady, yet vulnerable. It feels like she's been a ghost in our lives, doesn't it? The clarity of her observation resonated within the room, peeling back the layers of their facade. Yeah, but it's up to us to stop letting that ghost dictate our existence, Harold replied, injecting a hint of urgency into his words. Gazing out the window, he saw the last rays of the sun fading, just like the memories they were grappling with. As dusk enveloped the room, it sparked an unspoken resolve. He plucked a pen from the table and began to write with determined strokes. Eleanor, he wrote, was the embodiment of warmth, laughter, and resilience. But beneath those bright memories lay layers of resentment he hadn't dared touch until now. As he penned each line, he could feel his heart both tightening and expanding. This was the catharsis he so desperately sought. Are you writing about the good times with her, or? Sarah's question was tentative, hesitant for judgment. Both, he returned, not sparing her the depths of his honesty. The good, the bad, it all matters. The cracks in his voice betrayed the intensity of his emotions. Mark sighed, then picked up his pen, unleashing his own torrent of emotions onto the page. She was always in the background of every moment, wasn't she? Harold nodded, feeling a nascent connection form as they translated their individual pain into collective expression. It was still fraught with tension, but shared creativity was forging a bond thick with authenticity. Each letter written uncovered new vulnerabilities, shaping Harold's perception of himself. This wasn't merely a tribute to Eleanor, it was an examination of his own limits, resentments, and the beauty buried within memories. As they continued, the letters morphed from sorrowful artifacts into avenues for profound revelation. Yet with the calm came the lurking specter of self-doubt. Was he truly prepared to face the shadows within himself, or was it all a facade that would ultimately shatter? In that intimate chamber, surrounded by the noise of clashing emotions and flickering candlelight, Harold began to realize that confronting the pain of their shared loss could lead to untapped strength. They were not only reclaiming Eleanor's memory, but reshaping their identities as a unit. Let's read them aloud when we're done, Sarah proposed, and in her eyes, Harold saw an echo of the same fear he felt molding into a flicker of courage. Together, Mark agreed, his voice stronger now. As enthusiasm edged slowly into the room, something profound shifted within Harold. The idea of vulnerability began to lose its sting, transforming into an inviting challenge. However, moments before he could fully embrace it, doubt crept in again. The deeper they dug, the more perilous the excavation became. What truths lurked beneath the surface? The flicker of uncertainty hung palpably in the air, a whisper of the trials ahead. The moment of truth loomed, marked by unrestrained honesty or the possibility of fracturing their fragile unity before it could even fully form. Would they, together, muster the courage to venture into those uncharted emotional territories? In the heart of the darkness, a single question burned. Would these letters serve as their salvation or a catalyst for something deeper and more perilous? As the flickering candlelight bathed the room in a warm glow, Harold found himself lost in contemplation, each heartbeat echoing the weight of unspoken truths. He glanced at the blank pages before him, feeling the intensity of their shared silence. Mark and Sarah were still writing, pens moving with feverish urgency, but Harold's mind raced with the idea of what came next. Would sharing their letters bring them together, or fracture the fragile connections they were beginning to forge? The tension in the air grew thicker, mirroring the complexities of their emotions. Suddenly, the introspection that had flooded him was replaced with a tempest of doubts. Thoughts spiraled around his mind. Was it truly wise to unearth painful memories, or could they unleash a whirlwind of grief? He felt a stifling fear that the truths buried within him could be far more explosive than any of them anticipated. His gaze settled on Sarah, who seemed deep in concentration. Her brow furrowed in concentration, and her eyes darted across the paper as if she were trying to unearth something hidden there. A part of him wanted to reach out, to offer solace, but the haunting notion of vulnerability loomed large. Would sharing his own thoughts expose him in a way he wasn't ready to face? After marking several lines with deliberate strokes, Harold finally placed his pen down and breathed deeply. He couldn't bypass this moment. It was a threshold he'd have to cross, regardless of the uncertainty it carried. The words he needed to utter were intrinsic to his personal revolution. "About Eleanor," he began, his voice wavering slightly. "I always admired her strength. She carried burdens with such grace." He could feel Sarah and Mark's attention sharpening. "But in doing so, I wonder if she suppressed her own grief for our sake. I can't help but think, did we ever truly see her?" As each word fell into the space between them, it was like taking a decisive step onto a precarious ledge. The audacity to question their perceptions ignited something within him. Mark looked up, the flicker of understanding illuminating his features. "I thought we were supposed to be the strong ones. We were her support. But you think she kept us from knowing her struggles?" Harold nodding, buoyed by the unity forming in that realization. Perhaps we all did that to some degree. For the first time, he felt a sense of freedom within this sharing. The weight of their shared silence had begun to lift. Sarah hesitated, and finally voiced what had been coiling inside her. "I felt so powerless, like we were merely evergreen shadows hovering around her. It haunts me that we didn't see how much she bore." Encouraged by their burgeoning honesty, Harold took a breath. "We didn't permit ourselves to be vulnerable, only focusing on her needs, thinking we were protecting her. But healing begins in truth, doesn't it? Even if it tears us apart for a moment." The words struck a chord within them all. Mark dropped his pen, a resolute expression dawning on his face. "You're right. We need to confront this. The fear of grief. It's consuming us, making us numb to everything we could be. What if confronting our pain is the only way forward?" As silence gripped the room, the realization loomed that they were poised on the brink of transformation. They might unlock the potential for renewal, but it would come at a steep cost, facing their deepest fears, uncertainties, and regrets. With a newfound determination, Harold picked up his pen. Scrawling a few sentences, he committed his thoughts to paper again, feeling an electric energy permeate the air. This was not merely an act of remembrance, it was a venture into self-discovery. Yet as he wrote, a thought flickered in the periphery of his mind. He sensed there was more buried within him, more truths he had yet to confront. Interlaced with the hope of healing was the ever-present specter of unresolved pain. The watchful intimacy of the room weighed heavy, dictating the atmosphere with unexpressed fears and hopes. Their unity was undeniable, but would this renewed courage withstand the onslaught of deeper revelations? Harold's heart raced as the question pulsed in the air. What darkness dwelled within him, waiting to be unearthed? And would they emerge whole or wound even deeper? Their journey had begun, but the next steps promised challenges laden with ambiguity and risk. Would they have the strength to face the truths still veiled in shadows? Harold's pen moved with conviction across the paper, each stroke a quiet declaration of intent. His thoughts began to crystallize, and he felt a strange blend of liberation and trepidation. This was more than just a journey into his own past. It was a leap into what could be an even more profound understanding of himself and those around him. The weight of his own stories loomed large in his mind. He started to write about Eleanor, but his thoughts turned inward, peeling back layers he'd thought long buried. As he scratched the words onto the page, He found himself recounting moments he had hidden even from himself. Times of anger, moments of sheer denial when he ignored her need for support, and times when he simply turned away, thinking it was easier than confronting what lay beneath. What if I was the one who failed to see? What if I was as blind as I accused Eleanor of being? The questions flowed, each like a knife carving deeper into the fabric of his memories. He felt both shaky and emboldened. Across the room, Mark and Sarah exchanged glances, witnessing Harold's transformation. Confidence was trickling into his words, gathering momentum with each breath he took. Mark cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence. "What you're saying makes sense, Harold. We all have blind spots. Maybe it's time we map them out." His tone carried a hint of urgency, as if the topic had grown too crucial to let linger unaddressed. These words struck Harold deeply. For so long, he'd been hesitant, veering away from confrontation, both inner and outer. But now he felt a crackle arise in his emotional armor. How long had he hidden from himself? How many truths had he kept shackled in the name of denial? What if instead of hiding, we confronted these issues together? Harold's voice trembled with anticipation. What if each of us took turns to share not only the beautiful memories, but the painful ones too? The moments we regret, the choices we made in fear. The idea struck a chord in Sarah. Could we actually risk doing that? What would it look like for each of us to delve into the messy, unrefined details of our lives? Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and curiosity, realizing that sharing pain was as vital as sharing joy. "Exactly," Harold continued, feeling momentum swell. "It may feel excruciating at first, but to bypass that journey would deny us the opportunity to forge something deeper. Healing could spring from these raw connections, don't you think?" Mark nodded slowly. "I think I finally understand why we are still feeling trapped. We've overlooked the full picture, believing superficial connections would provide comfort." As they spoke, the candle's flame danced, illuminating the shadows that darkened not only the walls, but their hearts. Instinctively, Harold sensed they were no longer just filling pages. They were assembling a map of their emotional landscape, revealing terrains long thought inaccessible. There was a vulnerability in the air, a promise spun from shared honesty. Yet beneath it all, a haunting uncertainty lingered. The thought of sharing secrets and regrets filled him with dread. The very act could unravel everything he'd thought they had. The realization that confronting these issues would change them irrevocably sat heavily on his heart. "Before I go any further, I wonder about my own fear," Harold whispered almost to himself. "What if this exploration doesn't lead to healing? What if I unearth something I'm unequipped to handle?" The question hung like a thick fog, clamoring for attention. It was the defining moment. This meeting wasn't just about revealing secrets, but also about confronting uncertainties that had paralyzed him for far too long. He could feel it. The tension had thickened again, wrapping around them like vines constricting life. Harold could see Mark's brow furrowing and Sarah biting her lip, as they each grappled with the implications of what they were establishing. In the silence that ensued, it became clear. Every revelation carried with it the risk of fracture, and yet the fragility of their connections demanded attention. Harold's thoughts raced, as this was no ordinary gathering. Together they were risking more than their individual truths. They faced the volatility of their unified future. And there it was, looming over him like a jagged mountain. Would their honesty bring them closer, or would the chasms of shared trauma open wider than they could traverse? As he contemplated these possibilities, Harold prepared to cast his fears into the open. "Do we dare?" he asked, heart tightening. Would they unearth not only the buried pain, but each other's strength in its wake? The darkness within him remained uncharted. What awaited them at the edge of this daunting abyss? Harold sat at the table, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows over the blank pages before him. The vulnerability in the air felt electric. He sensed that this moment would determine the path forward for him and his family. Behind him, Mark and Sarah exchanged anxious glances, their pens poised, yet halted by the weight of uncertainty. "Let's expose what we've kept buried," Harold prompted, his voice steady, resolute. "Sharing our truths might feel daunting, but what if it's exactly what we need to heal?" He inhaled deeply, sensing that this was not merely about recollecting memories of Eleanor. It was a leap into collective self-discovery. Mark lifted his hand. "You mean to dig into our own feelings? The things we've kept from each other and ourselves?" His voice held disbelief, reflecting the internal struggle boiling beneath the surface. "Yes," Harold affirmed, matching Mark's gaze with unwavering conviction. "It's essential. To embrace vulnerability means to confront those fears, together." With a tentative nod, Sarah exhaled, her expression transitioning from trepidation to tentative determination. "Maybe we've hidden behind Eleanor's memory, avoiding our own realities. It's time we stop treating our grief as a burden." Slowly, pens lifted once more. Harold watched them begin to write, each letter bearing the weight of truths yet unexpressed. As he did, memories began to rewind in his mind, reflections of Eleanor's radiance tangled with the shadows of silence that had lingered since her passing. He thought of the moments he had avoided discussing, the arguments, the times he felt helpless, and the anger that simmered beneath the surface of his grief. He began to write, each stroke releasing long-held fears, the ink bleeding through the paper like a cathartic outpouring. "Eleanor thrived in chaos, yet I often found solace in silence. I wished for her to be strong, without knowing that strength required support. I failed to honor her complexity, just as I have failed to acknowledge my own." As Harold penned his reflections, he could feel a seismic shift within himself. Confronting the imperfections of their past became a bridge to clarity rather than a chasm of shame. He sensed the atmosphere change as Mark and Sarah lent their whispered thoughts, their voices woven into the fabric of honesty that Harold had cultivated. "I hid behind anger," Mark admitted, his voice gaining strength and clarity. "It felt easier to scold than to see where I could have supported her. When I didn't understand, I shut down. I never realized that grief is not just sorrow. It can also be an opportunity for connection." The words struck deep, resonating through Harold's heart like the burgeoning rhythm of a shared heartbeat. The simple act of expressing their pain transformed in front of him from a potential fracture to an act of unity. Sarah voiced her realization next, the steam of vulnerability rising. "I was so lost in my despair that I turned resentment inward. I thought that if I didn't feel the grief, it wouldn't hurt. But blocking it consumed me." Her hands trembled as she wrote, raw honesty spilling out like fragrant ink, drenching the pages until they glistened. Harold felt the potency of this moment ripple through them. Each confession forged an unbreakable bond, slowly dismantling the barriers built through fault and frustration. They were no longer holding their experiences in, but sharing them, transforming wounds into words that transcended their grief. Weeks of silence vanished into the night, replaced with shared burdens lifted together. This was the beauty of vulnerability, building a new paradigm that would carry them into the future. Yet, as he engaged each of their writings, he acknowledged the shadows that still lurked beneath the surface, the unvoiced fears and withheld emotions that awaited acknowledgement. "Let's read them," Harold suggested, feeling a surge of anticipation. "These letters can alter the very essence of our family." Mark leaned forward. "Are we really ready for this? The weight behind every letter, what if it changes how we see each other?" "Change is how we grow," Sarah chimed in, her newfound confidence lighting up her face. "Isn't that what this journey is for?" With hearts pounding in unison, they took turns reading aloud, excavating buried emotions bit by bit. As Harold spoke his truths, he noticed tears glistening in Mark's eyes and a tremor pass through Sarah's voice. With each passage, barriers faded, awkwardness evaporated, and compassion took bloom in their eyes. Eleanor's memory began to shimmer with warmth rather than the chill of loss. They were inviting her spirit back into their lives, not merely to commemorate moments shared, but to weave her legacy into the fabric of their renewed identities. As their words intermingled, Harold recognized the magnificence of surrendering to vulnerability. This was no longer merely an exercise in memory, but an act of redefining family bonds. "We've faced despair, and now we must cultivate joy in one another," he declared, feeling a fierce pride swell within him. "Together," they affirmed, uniting in that promise. The sheltered silence that had stifled their growth shattered, replaced by an openness that would lead them away from shadows and toward shared light. In that moment, Harold knew they had forged a foundation that embraced their individual journeys while unifying them in purpose. He realized he had finally reclaimed his voice, free from the burdens of his past perceptions. Through confrontation arose acceptance, and from acceptance flowed growth, a palpable transformation. Though scarred, they were resilient. As they concluded their readings, Harold felt a renewed sense of purpose. Facing trespasses hadn't diminished their love for Eleanor, but amplified it. They could breathe, as a family, with unshackled hearts. This was their catharsis, the profound joy of discovery amid shared grief. Now they could step into the world unencumbered by the bonds of misunderstanding. With Eleanor watching over them in spirit, Harold stood tall with renewed strength, ready to embrace each new chapter of their lives. This was it, their moment to thrive, forge connections anew, and honor the beautiful complexity of love. Your support matters immensely. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help us grow. Comment your reactions and theories about this inspiring transformation. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second to share.